In this session, we will interrogate the new EU talent partnership concept with a particular attention to the role of the private sector. My name is Jennifer Tangney. I am the Senior Project Manager for the Mobility Partnership Facility, a DG Home-funded initiative that is implemented by ICMPD. We have two expert speakers for the session. We're joined by Ms. Laura Corrado, Head of the Legal Migration and Integration Unit at DG Home. One could say the engine behind the talent partnerships. Ms. Corrado has been working since 2001 with the European Commission, where she has been mainly involved in policy areas linked to justice and home affairs. We're also joined today by Mr. Robert Plummer, who is a senior advisor at Business Europe, responsible for issues concerning migration and mobility, education and skills, social dialogue, and the European Labour Authority. So a portfolio that is very highly relevant to the talent partnership and the discussions. We invite you to share your thoughts and insights from today using the hashtag ViennaMigConf. Talent partnerships are to be the EU's new legal migration and mobility instrument, described as such, at least in the new Pact on Asylum, on Migration and Asylum. They will initially target the neighborhood countries, Western Balkans, Africa, and eventually other countries will come on stream too. I think it's clear that it is not altruism. The demographics in Europe with a declining population, aging population, and labor and skills shortages, as really brought to the fore as well during this current pandemic, mean that Europe really does have a need to engage with third countries and to find legal pathways. However, with the talent partnership approach, as we understand it from the new pact, it is the strong intention that there are also benefits for third countries through the scale up of legal migration pathways, mobility for employment and skills, investment in skills and education, and also through the leveraging of groups such as diaspora, private sector, and other partners. We heard yesterday from Azerbaijan and Moldova through the labour mobility session, looking at the Eastern Partnership. And both countries highlighted challenges and benefits of being a sending country. The Moldovan ambassador mentioned very specifically the challenge of brain drain. But it was quite heartening to hear that, at least in terms of the approach and theory described by the talent partnership, that she felt that the investment in skills, facilitation of qualification recognition, and through new circular migration programs, that there could indeed be very strong benefits for partner countries too. So on this note, I would like to hand over to our first speaker, Ms. Corrado, and to ask you, why the talent partnerships and why now?
Yes, thanks very much, Jennifer. Good morning, everybody. Well, yes, you said it partly in your introduction that we really need to work more and develop more the legal migration pathways for different reasons, both internal to the EU, and you recalled the demographics, you recalled the economic interest that we have when it comes to labor migration and skills of third country nationals, but also in the external dimension. So in the relations with the third countries, which is here the most relevant aspect, we really need to have more comprehensive, mutually beneficiary partnerships with third countries that are in the interest of the EU, of course, but also of the third countries themselves. So we really want to step up what we have done already in the past years and make it more comprehensive and effective. So what is new in the Migration Pact on that? We have already worked, and you know it very well, as ICMPD on pilot projects on legal migration. There have been initiatives before, but we really wanted to create a single framework, an umbrella, where we can put together different initiatives, be them on labor migration, but also on education and training, on skills validation, recognition of qualification. So bring all these areas together much more than what we have done so far, so that this really becomes a comprehensive package of measures to be offered and to be discussed with the third countries for further cooperation. So, of course, this means a much enhanced cooperation, first of all, within the Commission and with the External Service, which is certainly very important and on which we are working at the moment, but also more cooperation with the Member States and between the Member States, I would say, and of course, with the third countries. I renewed dialogue and collaboration with them. Which is very important. And this has to happen not only on the technical level, but we really need a renewed political engagement on the member states level in particular to go ahead and to make legal migration and asylum partnerships as an important element of the comprehensive approach and relation with them. And this is really the ambition. And we need to work very closely with the member states in the first place to do that. And of course, with the private sector, with the employers. But on that, I would let maybe Robert expand first, and then I will get back to this. Thank you.
Thank you. May I just ask for a clarification? What do you mean by talent? Because very often talent is understood as very high skilled, and it would be useful to also understand, does it mean the full range of skills that the EU labour market may require?
Yeah, I mean, there is no, of course, it's called talents. It's talent is always a very, very nice, a very positive word to use. But of course, it does not mean to really frame it to a very narrow, highly skilled population. That's not. I think even in the pilot project previously, we have kept it quite open, the sectors, the levels of skills and qualifications. So I think this remains something that is defined, of course, by labour market needs, but it's not really limited to very highly skilled or qualified people. No.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. So maybe, Robert, over to you from the business perspective. I mean, what is your take on the talent partnerships, and how do you see a role for business?
Well, thank you very much, Jennifer, and thank you for the opportunity to give some reflections from Business Europe side. I should stress at the beginning that they're preliminary reflections at this stage, because we're still obviously in the process of assessing and analysing the proposal. But I think, as Laura mentioned, we clearly share the view that there is a need to do more when it comes to economic migration in order to address the skills needs that companies have within the EU. And we've seen for quite a few years now that there is issues around skills mismatches, leading to labour shortages, but also labour shortages independent of skills mismatches. And we would certainly see a role for economic migration as part of the overall policy mix that we have within the European Union to help address some of those needs. And for us, we would typically put emphasis on the need for highly skilled migrants. So we would be looking more in the realm of the sort of the blue card as we have up to now, and also the ICT directive. But as you also mentioned in your introduction, we do absolutely need to look more broadly than that. If we look at the projections around demographic change, the aging of the workforce, and also if you look at the sort of sectoral breakdowns of skills needs, there is a real demand for workers of varying skill levels. So for us, it would absolutely be important to look at new ways of trying to attract the workers that we need. I think, of course, we're all living through this rather difficult and challenging COVID time at the moment, and we need to, at the same time, assess and put into context what those skills needs and labour needs are once we start to come through the pandemic. Because whereas, at least for us in our membership, whereas we were identifying real issues around labour shortages just a few months ago at the beginning of this year, we expect that the demand for labour is likely to be not as strong as it was, especially when we see a number of companies, unfortunately, in the position where they need to either temporarily or permanently lay staff off, or looking at short-time work schemes at the moment as well. So it's a bit of a moving target at the moment in some respects, but we also, of course, mustn't lose sight of the medium to longer term picture, and that is where something like the talent partnership, but also the EU talent pool proposal, which was also mentioned in the recent pact, we feel could certainly help to address some of the issues that employers have around how they find the skilled workers. We use skilled workers rather than talent, but by skilled we mean workers of all skill levels, which we clearly see a need for, and expect even beyond COVID that need will re-emerge as the recovery takes hold.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You mentioned skills mismatches and skills matching. Perhaps, Laura, over to you. How will the EU talent partnerships help link the needs of business in Europe to the supply available in third countries?
Yes, thanks very much. Indeed, this is a key element, as also Robert mentioned. And yeah, we have also other instruments on which we are working to help this kind of matching, like the talent pool, which of course we will be looking at separately. Well, I think what is really important, and I think this we have seen from the practice of the projects that we have developed so far, that there needs to be really a very early dialogue within member states, first to identify what are the labor market needs, and with the employers, employer associations, and so on. But then, of course, this dialogue has to continue, and to continue with the third country concern and with the labor authorities and agencies and tools that are there to really identify the workforce, but also in cases where we have partnerships which build also and develop skills. So these famous global skills partnerships to identify also those skills that then, once people are trained, could remain in the domestic labor market on the third country. And this is really the best win-win situation, where you have training partly for mobility to EU, in this case member states, but also for domestic workforce. So it really requires a very early preparation. We have seen that the support we provided to member states for the pilot project, for example, has helped really connecting some actors, especially when it comes to smaller employers that normally would not have the resources to reach out and to hire international staff. So I think we really can support this process, and we are happy to also have a dialogue on the European level with, of course, with Business Europe and all the economic social partners. And we will do that. We have already planned that, to see what the European level can do to facilitate that. Of course, there are things that needs to be done at the member states level with the employers there and the employer association. But then, of course, we can also facilitate a dialogue with the third country concerns and with the authorities there, being them labor or also interior, for when it comes to the migration requirements. So I think we can have an important facilitating role in cooperation with the member states and the authorities. Thank you.
Robert, maybe back to you with a follow-up on this. I mean, the experience of the pilots has been that it is very important to have private sector buy-in, identification of needs, but it's not an easy engagement. What has been your experience in terms of the identification of skills and the translation of that into the attraction of third country talent? Are there things that you would like to see brought forward as an approach in the talent partnership to test or try in order to strengthen the responsiveness?
Yeah, I think you're right. It's the engagement of employers, social partners, companies directly will be, I think, key to the success of the initiative. And I think it's about trying to, in a way, convince and motivate companies that they would see added value in such an approach. If I can maybe draw a parallel to the role that companies play in education and training systems within the national context, that again is something that varies considerably, and the governance structures of how those approaches are taken also varies greatly. But what we do see is that where companies are well engaged in the sort of the design, the delivery of curricula, and where they have a say in the what skills are taught, whether it's in the practical part in the companies or in the classrooms, that's where companies tend to get most involved and engaged. And I think if we're looking at expanding that sort of approach and using it in third countries as well, there clearly would need to be a framework, a governance framework that would encourage companies of all sizes, as you say. And I think typically it would be harder for SMEs to engage in this sort of partnership due to limited financial but also human resources as well. So I think there's those sorts of issues that we would need to look at, and like you said as well, touching upon the issue of skills identification. I mean, typically we identify a need for STEM skills, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, the sort of ICT, engineering elements in particular. But it's difficult to, there's always a time lag, of course, when you identify a particular set of skills needs and then you look to put that into a particular training program. So we have some tools at the European level, a lot being done actually by CEDEFOP, the European Agency for Vocational Training, in relation to skills anticipation, forecasting. And we need to try and, I think, build up those sort of models that we have, and also in a real-time capacity. I think that would also be an important feature that would help to identify the needs, but also to do so at a regional and sectoral level. I think we really need that sort of targeted element to it as well. It's not just looking at the needs within a certain member state or within the EU as a whole. I think we would really need to build the cooperation at the regional, the sectoral level, and identify the skills needs that would be at that level, and therefore to have the sort of the partnerships and the cooperation down at that level if we would have a real concrete and sustainable outcome. Thank you.
So based on what you described, then we would need to have a sectoral skills analysis for a few different sectors. But then through the talent partnership, each country has its own specific bilateral relationship. So maybe Laura, over to you. How can you see that translating if we have, try to have a unified sectoral approach on one side, but yet must translate it into a variety of what are essentially bilateral frameworks?
Yeah, no, well, as I said, I don't see that the EU certainly having an exclusive role here. We have to work with the member states, and as Rob said, sometimes you might also need to differentiate within a member state, a region, to identify specific need, etc. So we will have to find a way to put all of this a bit together. If we have already one of the projects, at least, where we have more than one member state involved with North Africa. Of course, the labor market needs remain national or even regional, as I said, but of course we can have an important role as the EU. At the moment we have bilateral relation discussions with her countries, which we have on also a number of issues, including on migration. Then we can really bring all of this together as part of the dialogue and the cooperation, and have a sort of a global offer on the EU level. Of course, this is complicated. I'm not saying that's going to be easy. We have tried in the past and it hasn't worked out very well, for example, in the context of the Joint Valletta Action Plan. But I think if there is a renewed commitment now, and that's why I said the political buy-in of the member states is essential in this, I think we can do it at least with some strategic and key third countries where we have already an extensive cooperation in the field of migration. And so we should really add this element much more in the dialogue and in the cooperation with them. But not alone. I mean, I don't think the EU level can do this alone, for sure.
Great, thank you. Robert, what does business need to effectively engage and help identify these sectoral needs, but also to be more active in engaging in the kinds of models of mobility and the kinds of pilots that should be taking place? How can business really engage with the process as the talent partnerships are developed leading up to this conference, but also in delivery?
Yeah, I think there would need to be a clear sort of governance structure in a way, and we touched upon it already, the sort of interaction between governments, the role of the social partners within each member state is different due to the nature of their different industrial relations systems. So we would need to have some sort of governance framework, but also one that would give sufficient sort of scope for flexibility, I think. And also, as I said, when it comes to engaging the actors at the sort of the regional and the sectoral level as well. But I think you would need, I think, elements of financial support to an extent, but also sort of human resource support, I think, for companies. I think even for the larger ones, I think especially at the moment as well, and don't harp on too much about it, but for many companies at the moment, of course, the key issue is one of survival and being able to come through the COVID situation. So I think, and skills will be a big part of the recovery, but at the same time, the resources, human and financial, that companies have to maybe train workers, to upskill, reskill their workers, is probably not going to be as substantial as might have been the case just a few months ago. So if we're trying, I think, to convince companies that they should engage in this initiative, I think they would probably be looking for certain reassurances in terms of what they put in and what support there is to help them contribute to that, but also what they get out. And in that respect, potentially a key consideration whenever a company engages in training a worker is what is going to be their return on that investment. And especially in the concept of the talent partnerships, I think if you're asking companies, social partners, to engage in programs that would look to train migrants within their own country before they would migrate to the EU or to one of the member states, I think a key consideration for a company is going to be that issue of return on investment, and are they going to get the benefit of that training? What might happen if someone decides not to migrate, or if they migrate but then decide not to stay in the company where they contributed to their training, or where they first moved to, or maybe they would move to another member state once they were in the European Union. I think those sorts of questions we need to, or issues that we need to think through a bit more if we really want to make the case to companies, because typically a company would see an investment in training as an investment, but in this case it might be a bit more of a harder sell when there's that sort of physical, geographical distance between the company and the person that they might be helping to train in the first place. So there needs to be a clear framework, as I said, but within that there would also need to be this element of flexibility and adaptability to take into account the different sort of labour market situations that we have, but of course also the different skills needs that we have as well.
Great, thank you for that. Indeed, I think through some of the pilot projects that the Mobility Partnership Facility is supporting, it's quite clear that an investment in individuals by a business needs to have a commercial dimension to it. It needs to be, either that they're going to retain the skill or they are in other ways compensated for that investment. But again, in member states, the dynamics are all very different. Some member states, for them, it's circular migration, short-term placements, cyclical migration patterns are what is politically desired and acceptable. In other countries, such as Germany, for example, longer enduring migration is the route that they seem to be following more significantly. Laura, is there the space within the talent partnerships to accommodate all of these different needs and aspirations?
Yes, no, absolutely. I think even when we developed previously the pilot projects, the concept was quite broad to encompass different situations. Now I think it's even broader. So of course, the challenge is to bring together, find a balance between different interests, because I can see very well that from an employer perspective, in most cases, they would want to keep the person if there's been a training, pre-training to which they contributed, there's been engaged in a process, and of course, there we are looking at a longer term migration and investment from the perspective of a company. So for sure that there's a clear interest there. But as you say, there are different models possible. And from the point of view of a third country, it might be more desirable, at least in some cases, to have some form of circular migration so that people get experience, training, and then at some point they go back and they are integrated. What I was mentioning about training, partly the domestic workforce and partly people going for mobility, it's clear that this is something that has to do also with the buying in of the third country concerned. So it's something more where I see a role, not so much for the employers, that of course for them it's the person who are mobile that are of interest, who come to work for their companies and who are trained, but from the point of view of the cooperation between two states, two governments, and between the EU and the third countries, of course, this dimension of providing training for the domestic workforce is also important for the buying in of the third country and their authority. So, as I said, there are very different interests at stake and they have to be reconciled. And there can be different models that can work, some addressing more the interest from the employer perspective, others more from the employers in the EU, others from the third country perspective. So I think we will have to reconcile these different interests, and through different models and possibility of partnerships. In any case, the talent partnerships, it also covers, it's broader than labor migration. It covers also training, internship, educational opportunities, where of course we have a bit less the issue of people, of companies as such. It can also be for students, for postgraduates, and so on. So it's a complex process which involves several stakeholders with sometimes different interests, which is totally normal. But I think the concept is broad enough to really cater for different forms of mobility and of migration to the EU. So I'm confident that we can create a good cooperation with all the stakeholders for different forms of talent partnership, depending also on the third countries concerned. It's not a fixed model. It's not a one-size-fits-all. We might need a different type of talent partnerships with different regions and countries and their countries. So this is really to be seen further.
Great, thank you. With an eye on the time, because our focus session is racing past, maybe Laura, just to stay with you, we understand there is to be a conference next year. What is the DG Home roadmap to that conference?
Well, we have had, for the moment, preliminary discussions with the Portuguese presidency. So it's certainly something that will happen in the first part, I would say, quarter 4 of 2021 under the presidency. And until then, we are planning a number of consultations with member states. Next week, there is a discussion at the Strategic Committee on Migration, Integration, Frontier and Asylum, for example, with the member states. We will have other discussions with them. We're discussing with economic and social partners, as Robert knows, at the beginning of December. So we're planning a number of preparatory discussions and consultations on that. Of course, the event will be high level, so political, because as I said, the political dimension is also very important for the buying in of the member states on the EU side and of the third countries as well at a later stage. So we will prepare this with a number of preliminary consultations, and then we will co-organize this with the Portuguese presidency.
Great,
That's what I can say.
Thank you very much. And Robert, from your side in Business Europe, do you have plans in place over the coming weeks and months?
Yeah, we'll be obviously reflecting on this more with our membership over the time to come. And as Laura said, we're very pleased that we have the open dialogue as part of the cooperation we have as European economic and social partners with the Commission on this. So we'll absolutely be picking up the issue with them in parallel to further discussing with our membership. So I think those would be the two strands for us over the coming weeks and months.
Great, thank you for that. The Mobility Partnership Facility and ICMPD more broadly will also be closely following the overall pact, but also the talent partnership. We are bringing further pilots on stream at the moment, and I think we will also do our best to facilitate further engagement and research pieces linked to the talent partnership in support of its evolution. I'd like to say thank you very much to our two speakers and to our audience. I hope that you enjoyed the focus session and indeed all of the focus sessions that have been held through the Vienna Migration Conference. I do also hope that in 3.5 hours that you will take the opportunity to join us at 15:30 for the final senior panel on migration partnerships in action today. And for the closing remarks by our Director General, Michael Spindelegger. So thank you so much for your time, and I wish you all a good day.